All right, folks, we're still in section 3. I know it's taking us a really long time to get through section 3, but there is just so much content here. And we're getting such a really global perspective of what's going on in individual nations because of the tensions between the USSR and the United States in the Cold War. And I really just don't feel like it's okay for us to just skip over all of this. So, if you recall, we've just ended with the United States accepting a withdrawal of troops in any point from Taiwan, essentially saying, yeah, Taiwan, you are part of China. Um, we are also in the middle of détente, which is Nixon's strategy to de escalate the Cold War. So, what happens next is pretty predictable with American politics, and that is that détente, the president, the Congress, they're going to disagree, okay? And because Congress has power and the executive branch has power, they disagree, and Congress does not support Nixon's efforts. Okay, so they kind of derail some of Nixon's ideas here. We're going to move forward, and it's interesting. Actec puts this in here. So we do have another president between Nixon and Jimmy Carter. It's Gerald Ford, but he has a, quote, brief and forgettable tenure. And then after Gerald Ford, we get Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is a Democrat, the first Democrat to be elected in quite a while. Let's see. When he is inaugurated, he says that one of the things the United States is going to do as a result of him being president is they're going to return back to what he calls idealistic internationalism. Jimmy Carter has a much stronger focus on human rights. Okay, he's much more focused on human rights and less focused on military might and projecting military might. Okay, so now that we know that background, Carter's human rights rhetoric was an unwelcome intrusion into the Soviet Union's internal affairs, because the Soviet Union is not known for having positive civil rights, positive human rights. The Soviet Union also looks at this as a violation of détente. That if you're going to tell us that the way we're treating our people is not acceptable, then you're escalating tension. You're not de-escalating tension. Carter does not have very much in the way of foreign policy experience, okay? He doesn't really understand the consequences of what he's doing here. He knows that the Soviet and US relationship is tenuous, but he doesn't really understand how much and what the impact of that decision will be on that relationship. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the Soviet Union's interference in other countries. In previous sections of the Social Science Resource Guide, we saw a lot of examples of the United States interfering in other nations' businesses, right? The Soviets do it too. So the first one we're going to look at is on the continent of Africa. This gets really confusing because essentially there are all kinds of de-colonized nations that the Soviet Union and the United States see as up for grabs. They're really not. They want their own futures, but they need a little support getting past decolonization and starting their own nations. This current grouping of countries that we're going to talk about. This happens in the Horn of Africa. Okay, so this is in that northern and eastern part of Africa. It's kind of up in the Gulf. It's not far from Saudi Arabia and Egypt. It's up in there, okay? So this is a really strategic area of the world related to oil. Okay, so the Soviets are meddling in nations in this area, okay? Somalia, Ethiopia, they're meddling in those countries, trying to figure out what kind of nation they want to be. Jimmy Carter, president of the United States now, He has a security advisor. Brzezinski is his last name, and likes he likes the idea of, I don't want to say it this way. When someone is hawkish, they see things as warlike. Okay, hawkish means that they want to be warlike. Now that's not really the way Carter is, but that's the way Brzezinski is. And so what happens is they see this meddling in the Horn of Africa as the Soviet Union really escalating things and saying, okay, we're going to start working on these third world countries even more. Shortly after, we start seeing the Soviets get into Afghanistan. So they actually invaded Afghanistan in 1979. President Carter condemns that, says it's a violation of international law, and tells the American people that they should be worried about this, okay? Again, we're talking about oil here, okay? So the United States has just gone through an oil crisis. There were lines for gas stations that were hours long. They're nervous about an oil crisis and oil shortages. And here Carter comes in and says, the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan is going to further threaten our supply of oil. Carter says that they need to withdraw from Afghanistan, and of course the Soviets don't listen; they don't care, and so the United States then boycotts the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow. This next sentence is very, very important for affairs in the Middle East going forward until today, even. Covertly, Jimmy Carter starts funneling military support to Afghan Mujahideen rebels. These are the rebels who are fighting against Soviet occupation, okay? These people are fighting against Soviet occupation. Importantly, one of these Mujahideen rebels is Osama bin Laden. He's a leader of the Mujahideen rebels, okay? We can see where that support ends up today. Another problem that's going on. So we've got the Horn of Africa. This is Middle East area. We've got Afghanistan, Middle East area. Now we have Iran. At this point, Iran is an ally of the United States. In early 1979, however, we have a revolution by a Muslim cleric, and this cleric's name is Ayatollah Khomeini. This overturns the regime of someone who has been an ally in the region of the United States for 25 years, okay? Shah Reza Pahlavi was an ally of the United States. Now, he's not necessarily a good person. Pahlavi is oppressing his people, and so the popular uprising of Ayatollah Khomeini is not surprising. So things are going on at the same time here. Kabul is in Afghanistan, okay? So Soviet tanks have invaded Kabul at the same time, well, pretty close to the same time, 6 weeks different. Khomeini's Islamic Revolution, there are students storming the American embassy in Tehran. So Tehran is in Iran, Kabul is in Afghanistan. We have groups of people invading these cities, neither of which the United States supports, okay? The United States can't effectively split its attention very well in this, okay? So, important to remember that these happen at similar times. So when this embassy is captured, this is terrifying to the United States. An American embassy is captured. There are 52 captives being held prisoner. And this goes on for over a year, okay? You need to see this, 444 days that this embassy hostage crisis goes on. It's all over the news. People are talking about it all the time. Jimmy Carter is not doing very well in re-election at this point anyway, and he's not seen as very strong with foreign policy. This just makes things worse, all right? Carter does try to have a rescue mission. It failed. 8 more American servicemen were killed in this. This makes Jimmy Carter look even worse. Problems are happening in Central America. Problems are happening in Africa. Problems are happening in the Middle East. American power under Jimmy Carter is weakening. The strength of its enemies is strengthening. When this happens, the United States is in the middle of a presidential election, and what we end up with is a landslide victory for Ronald Reagan. His big promise is making America great again, and he vows to restore American prestige around the globe. That's when we start seeing the United States meddling in lots and lots of other nations' politics, continuing to do that again in the 1980s, which we talked about in section 4 and got through in class.